My name's Lindsey Greaves. I've been married to John for 26 years and we have 5 children. And I've also been a teacher during some of that time and have recently retired.
Briefly, can you tell us something of your own story?
I grew up in the north of England in what seemingly looked like an ordinary family. I was the youngest of 3. 2 very much older brothers, and so I was an only child, really. My parents were quite disconnected from each other and also from me, so I grew up a very lonely child and just didn't really have any connection with my parents at all, apart from being fed and clothed. They looked after me in that kind of way. I didn't have a close relationship with my mum. In fact, I didn't have any close relationships really with any kind of women as role models. And so my life was outside of the family. One of my earliest memories is trying to get adopted by another family. And I had a sense of a lack of belonging, really. So that was my early years. As I headed into teenage years, I began to feel very overly connected with certain girls. And as my teenage years progressed, that got more intense. My desire to have one friend and be over-involved with that one friend was very, very strong. I did go out with boys because it was the cultural thing to do, and I didn't really think anything else about that. I wanted to do that and had several boyfriends, many boyfriends in fact, but I never felt emotionally connected to any of them. I had this one friend and her family, and they were my security, and I was terrified of losing that.
So what was the turning point for you? Because you met John.
Yes. Well, I became a Christian in my early 20s. I'd had a sense of God when I was young, but my parents weren't Christians. I didn't have a religious upbringing, but I had a real desire for something that was quite driving when I was young. I think because I was very lonely, I would often talk to God. I often prayed to God. And I became a Christian then when I was about 22. And I developed a strong relationship with God. And I also just came into a whole new world, really, of belonging in terms of the church, where people hugged each other, and that was very new to me. I'd never experienced anything like that, and the kind of emotional closeness that people had with each other was very, very different from anything I'd ever experienced. I'd become quite a worldling in my teenage years. I used to drink a lot and go to a lot of parties. So this was a whole new world. And I was very aware that this same-sex attraction that I'd had was actually getting worse, not better, when I became a Christian. I'd thought that all that would kind of go away, but it didn't. It actually got worse because of the deeper connections that I was making with people, particularly women. And at that point, I got involved in a full-blown relationship with somebody for a couple of years within the context of the church, strangely. At the time, I didn't think that it was wrong. It felt right, and I sort of led a double life in a way, and so did she. But after about 2 years, I began to feel that it was wrong, and I began to know that God had something more for me than this. It wasn't an outside influence, it was from the inside. I felt that God was saying, I've got something more than this for you. And I began to seek help, but there wasn't much really forthcoming at that time. I began to open up my life a bit. I began to be honest with people about what was really going on. And that was the first time I think I'd ever allowed anybody else in to those deep parts of me. Soon after that, I went abroad for a couple of years. I wanted a new start. I wanted to get away. And I met with Christians who weren't compromising about that kind of thing. And they were actually able to help me and have some input into my life. And it was during that time that I began to seek God for myself about marriage. Deep down, that's what I really wanted. It's what I'd always wanted, was marriage and children. And I had always been really unhappy about this same-sex attraction.
So can you tell me something about how it was that you met John?
I came back from abroad and I was in faith to meet somebody. And we met at a party and we had an immediate connection with each other. We both shared a love for the Jewish people and for the Bible and for all things God, really. And we had an immediate connection with each other. I knew straight away that this was the man that God wanted me to marry. And it filled me with great joy. And I was very excited. And so we actually got married within a year of knowing each other. In my early years as a Christian, I began to understand some of the reasons why I had been so intensely same-sex attracted, but I wasn't able to do anything about it, really. I got married, but I'd never really dealt with the root reasons, only up to a point. Then about 10 years ago, after we'd been married some time and had 5 children, we came across a ministry in the church which helped people with this. And at that point, I really began to get to grips with the deep reasons of why I had been so intensely same-sex attracted, because it was still there in my life, and I knew that it was still a vulnerability. And I had a bit of a crisis about 10 years ago on that issue, which really propelled me to get to the bottom of it, which I did. And I received some real help from a particular ministry in this area. I wish that I had been able to access that much earlier on. And I have a deep heart for people now who are in my situation, who need help. And I think things could have been a lot easier for me had I accessed help earlier. And that's what we want to do now. We want to make ourselves available so that young people don't have to really walk through the years we went through, just trying to manage this on your own and cobble things together.